There she goes. All right. High-fiving guys on the CBOE right now, Chicago Board Options Exchange.
Well, Steve and Mike were making sure that we were getting things done, Pete. So once again, folks, that's the real backdrop behind me. That's the Chicago, well, actually not. It's CBOE Global Markets.
That's right. Yeah.
And with 26 exchanges around the world, you can see why they go by global markets, Pete. And I'll be back here this afternoon for Charles Payne at 2:45 Eastern Daylight Time. So that should be fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be as much fun as the Rebels Edge, however.
Never. Not a chance. We love Charles, but I mean, it's a little different deal. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, tell him, Jared, Charles doesn't have dancing bears.
Nope.
Or snowboarding bears or dancing robots or boing. We don't have any of that. Yeah, he doesn't have any of that.
It's not nearly as fun.
We have that.
This is the gold standard.
That's right. Well, welcome back to the Rebels Edge, folks. I'm John Najarian. He's Pete Najarian. And Jared is indeed handling all those other chores like the market ticks, the macro minute, the clocks, everything else. So without further ado, Pete, which is, I guess, a French way of saying, let's get started. Let's get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
Macro minute, it really still is all about how does the market react to tough talk out of Jackson Hole, which is coming our way in 3 days, because that's when Jay Powell will be there speaking about various things, more or less, 2% being his target still and the Fed's target and so forth. So that's the macro on my side, Pete.
I'm going to give you an ultra macro. How about that? How about the 30-year mortgage rate hitting just about, call it 7.5, John, 7.5%. It's the highest level since November of 2000. That's an extraordinary number, and it certainly is affecting things because we had the slowest pace for sales since 2010. That gets pretty macro, but I'll tell you what, it is affecting a lot of the market right now because there's no inventory. And yet these rates just keep going up for that 30-year mortgage.
Yeah. And ultimately what that does, folks, is it prices people out of homes, even if they could find one, even if they can convince somebody who's got a 3% or lower mortgage to sell their home. The issue is, okay, now where do you get a mortgage? And you don't qualify for that level of house anymore, which takes us to fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
Well, that's easy because obviously the thing holding back housing, Pete, other than inventory, which sort of is a dual-edged sword, it lets them hold price, but it also makes it really difficult on them. And the 10-year being up to 4.36 today. Now it's 4.33 right now, but that's still a very high 10-year, and it doesn't show any signs of ebbing.
Right. It's been sticky. It's been there for the month of August, essentially over 4. And now you're talking about some of the levels that we're hitting today, which is extraordinarily high as well. How about another one, John? How about the 2-year? We've been waiting to see when is this thing going to actually pierce through 5, because we're looking at the 10-year every day, but the 2-year is just kind of holding out. Well, it's no longer holding out. Now it's up and through that 5% level as well. It's been knocking on there. It finally broke through, expected, and also to expect the markets are going to start to be a lot more interesting now, John, in terms of volatility and a lot of other things, because they don't seem to usually like, especially the NASDAQ, don't like these rates getting up there because all of a sudden the risk part of things starts to move people over into those treasuries.
Yeah, and it certainly hasn't helped in the crypto space either, Pete, because the higher the yield here, the less you need to farm crypto out to get a yield there. All right, how about Fulcrum Therapeutics, Pete? These guys had good news, and Patience had some really good news too, because they lifted a clinical hold that they had on a treatment for sickle cell disease. And sickle cell disease, of course, a disease that primarily affects Black Americans, but Blacks around the world, Pete. And this would be a huge victory for people that are afflicted with that. Let's hope that it's justified not just in the stock price, but in effectiveness.
Absolutely. And it is important. Here's the problem, though, because you always have to step back and say, okay, wonderful for the human race, but on the other side of it, how are they doing? Well, John, it's only in phase 1. So, when we talk about a lot of these different drugs that are out there, this company is very interesting. The treatments that they've got one in phase 3. They've got multiple in the earliest clinical phases, but this particular one is in phase 1. So when will that actually be marketable? When will the company be able to start making money and that type of thing? That's a ways out. So it's a great move today. This is exciting news that they've lifted this hold. But I'll tell you, John, this isn't like many of them, and you and I both know this. You've got to go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then you're just about off and ready to go into the public. But you still have one more hoop to go through. But this is a long ways from getting there right now.
Yeah, and it's that burn rate, folks, that we always talk about with biopharmas and so forth. The burn rate being, okay, can you survive long enough to get this thing to market? Or is this something that maybe you run out of money? Let's hope they don't run out of money. Okay, Dick's, Pete, Dick's Sporting Goods, DKS, down double digits. Q2 profitability fell well short of the CEO's expectations, apparently, and Wall Street's expectations as well. And that's why the stock's just getting clocked. I mean, 282 a share, that's the bottom line number, versus 375 was the estimate. Now, the sales numbers looked pretty good, Pete, but they just didn't make as much money because apparently the consumer couldn't or wouldn't pay up for the list prices, and they had to discount. That's my take.
Heavy discounts, inventory issues. The CEO was very, very adamant about that, talking about inventories and that being a problem. As you already laid out, John, I mean, you look at the earnings and it's terrible. Then you look at the full year guidance and they had to streamline that back a little bit too. And that's the biggest problem. And you and I both know that. So you miss on earnings. Well, can you make it up by having some guidance that might look a little bit better? They weren't able to do that. And for that reason, this stock is getting absolutely hammered today. Last I looked, it was down about 23%. Could be better, could be worse. But that's a stock that's under a heck of a lot of pressure right now. And by the way, 52-week low of 98, it's not quite there. But last I looked, it was trading about 112. So it's getting damn close from a stock that actually was as high as 152 over the last year. So this is a stock that a lot of people are looking at because of the comments from the CEO about his inventories.
Yeah, it's a tough time for a number of retailers, Pete. And another one popped up here, which was Macy's, symbol M, like Mary. And Macy's now down 13%. It was down 5, then it was down 8, then it was down 10, and so forth and so on. Luckily, though, we had unusual put activity. So unusual put activity, folks, means somebody was buying a lot of puts into these earnings results. And Macy's trades down hard because, well, let's see, they made more money on the bottom line number. Sales were pretty good, but they have a really cautious outlook. So whoever was betting on Macy's trading down may have had an inkling that they'd have to warn on the coming quarters. In other words, the guidance, which is really hammering them.
Yeah, the big problem, John, and if you've ever walked in one over the last, even I'll go back a couple of years, they're kind of a mess, right? You walk in there and stuff is thrown all over hell, and you're looking around going, hey, man, does anybody ever pick it up and put it back on a hanger? I mean, and I'm not really exaggerating all that much because I've been in them in Florida, I've been in them in Minnesota, California, I've been in Macy's, and I see that. So one of the issues I see also, John, their net sales, they beat numbers, but down 8.5%. And then you look at same store sales, that's down 8.2%. Those are issues. And then all of a sudden they decide to go off on this long thing about, Well, there's a lot of delinquencies on credit cards. Now, we're aware of that. We know that credit card debt is what, 16, 17 billion when you pile it in there with household debt and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a huge number, right? I mean, there are some major issues going on there. Delinquencies, certainly it could be a part of it, but this stock is getting hit hard. And thank goodness at Market Rebellion, we had this UOA, because this showed everybody, hey, look, these puts are being bought and they're being bought for a reason. And today we got our reason.
Yeah. The stock was 1270 just a little bit ago, folks. So the right to sell it at 1450, which is what you saw on those puts that we showed you, that would basically be worth in the neighborhood of $1.70, just intrinsically, in other words, in the money. So $1.70, $1.80. I don't know what the high is on the day for that, Pete, but I do know this: if you want a BOGO, buy one get one free. We have that. In other words, if you go to marketrebellion.com/bang, that's marketrebellion.com/bang, BANG, you will get 2 months for the price of one. That's a BOGO. So if you want to check out some of that great work that our crew does finding these needles in the haystack, check it out. All right, one more, Pete. Let's talk about Fabrinet. And this one, a spectacular pop to the upside. It was up as much as 38%. It's holding on to still a strong double-digit gain. Quarterly earnings, $1.86. This is optical packaging and manufacturing service provider. So these fourth quarter results, their fourth quarter results, were pretty spectacular. And that's why we're seeing such a fabulous move, Pete.
Yeah. When you look at revenue up 12%, and oh, by the way, they did drop the two letters that everybody likes to drop, but it's real, AI. They talked about that supporting this growth, John, all the way in and through to 2024 as well. That was something that I think a lot of people held on to that. They loved hearing about that and how that's working for the company. And oh, by the way, it did hit a new 52-week high today as well, 154. This thing is on fire. Last I looked, up somewhere close to about 25%. It had come off of that 52-week highs, but holy smokes, John, they delivered those numbers. When you look at the earnings, and you mentioned it, but you look at the earnings, they blew it out. They blew out just about everything. And I think the AI piece has really got people very excited about that as well, because it's real and they're not just throwing it out there. This is a part of their business. And that's something that I think they wanted to emphasize as well.
One thing that I'd emphasize, Pete, is people like our old friend Guy Adami used to always say, oh, stocks take the stairs up and the elevator down. This one took the express elevator up. And every once in a while, you see stocks that do exactly that. And when you catch one of these, it's like lightning in a bottle. Yeah. All right, Pete, I know you've got another athlete who's pretty much like lightning in a bottle. And his stock sort of fell going into the draft, but then somebody wised up and said, we're talking about football here, guys.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, John, it's interesting because this is a twofold thing. Is Georgia just got so much more talent than every other school right now, or what? I mean, yes. let's just take a look at this, John. So the gentleman you're talking about is Jalen Carter, number 9 draft pick this past year. Jordan Davis, 6'6", 335-pounder. He's a Bulldog as well, out of Georgia, defensive tackle. You also got Nakobe Dean, linebacker. You also got Nolan Smith, linebacker. You also have Keely Ringo, cornerback, all playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. They may as well be the Georgia, like the post-grad Georgia or something like that, the way they've gone after these guys. But I will tell you this, and you alerted me about this great video about this guy, and people are talking about him, John. Jalen Carter, this year's big guy, 6'3", 315, can run like a running back. His moves are unbelievable. His balance, his size, his strength, you just can't say enough about him. He is, by a lot of folks talking about him, he is the baddest man in the NFL right now. Nobody wants to go up on this guy because who has arguably the best offensive line right now in football? A lot of people would say Philadelphia. There's a lot of great O-lines out there, but most people would say Philadelphia Eagles. That's what helped get them to the Super Bowl last year. And their quarterback had a great year. Well, it helps when you've got those 5 guys up front. These guys, these 5 who are regarded as the best maybe in the entire NFL, can't block them. They literally come off the practice field holding their helmets going, Jesus, I don't know what the hell to do against this guy because he's tenacious, he's fast, he's strong, spin moves, all of that. But it's absolutely something like we have never seen, John. Oh, by the way, they also have a running back. They got that kid Swift, who used to be at Detroit, is now there as well. He's out of Georgia. They just went out there and just said, just bring me your folks. Anybody who looks like an NFL guy, we'll sign him up. But what do you think? And what are you thinking about Philly, by the way, which is Georgia North? And what do you think about Jalen Carter? You've seen a lot on him.
Yeah. And Pete, I would agree with you. Jalen looks like an absolute Hall of Famer practically. Now, you can't crown him, as our friends would say. Crown him.
Crown him.
You can't crown him yet, but he's certainly going to give the other teams fits. And I know that that offensive line that you described with several all-pros on it, they're just waiting for the other guys that think they can block this guy to say, okay, take your best shot, dude. Because this guy gets around people. He goes through people. He can throw you right down on your back. If he gets just one step on you, he can just throttle you. I was amazed by the footage in that Jalen Carter highlight reel, Pete. And all it was one practice.
John, the crazy thing is the guy's a rookie. And we are kind of crowning him. But the reason we're crowning him right now is for all the right reasons. It would be different if he went to a team that had a terrible offensive line anyway, and he's just eating them alive. He didn't. He goes to the Philadelphia Eagles against one of the best offensive lines, and they can't stop him. And they're walking off the practice field going, I don't even want to go up against this guy. He's a nightmare. Yeah. And by the way, when you're done with him, well, all of a sudden Jordan Davis steps up in front of you at 6'6", 335, who has a lot of the same ability as the other guy. I mean, it's like, well, what do you want? You know, do you want to get punched in the left side of your face or right? Take your pick. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, Pete, and as we all know, Travis Kelce's brother, you know, the all-pro future Hall of Fame tight end, his brother plays O-line for the Eagles. And he was just, you know, singing this kid's praises, saying, I can't wait till he gets a hold of other guys instead of just us.
Well, the good news is once you're done with training camp, those practices are, you know, they're a little patty cake anyway. So they won't have to worry about them. And those other teams are and they will have to worry about them. All right, we're going to move on to Jim Harbaugh, John. The news never stops. And I will say this, and you know my feelings for Michigan. I find those people to be generally arrogant. I can't stand them. I hated playing football against them. All that being said, I fully respect everything that they have done and how they've handled this whole situation with the suspension that they came up with. The athletic director came up with the suspension because this thing's been kind of floating out there, John. He did some illegal recruiting during pandemic and what they did in terms of, you know, in person and they're this, all the rest of that crap. And I understand, okay, broke the rules. Were these the biggest violations ever? No, because when you look at what they grade this out at, it's the lowest end. But you probably got to pay some sort of a piper, right? So they've already put out the olive branch, so to speak. The AD said, look, he's going to miss, this is by Michigan's decision, he's going to miss the first 3 games, but only game day. He's practicing all week. Game day, he's not on the field. And they're doing it for the first 3, which is East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green. Not exactly murderer's row for Michigan, but it is the first 3 games. And then they kick off the Big Ten season, and he's back out there. I think, in my opinion, John, I like the move. Anybody would have probably thought to do some kind of a move internally, but I like that Michigan did this. Full respect for how they handled this. He talks about what a great guy Jim Harbaugh is and that, you know, this was foolish. He made a mistake. But as Harbaugh always says, John, don't get bitter, get better. And that's what these guys are going to try to do. Michigan's one of those teams that people are talking about for a national title this year. So those first 3 games, I don't think they stumble. And I don't think you have to have Harbaugh on the field necessarily. I think they're going to know what he wants to do. What do you think about this? Did Michigan do the right thing? Or is this even enough that the NCAA might say, you know what, that was enough. We're done with this whole thing.
I think the NCAA will say this is enough, Pete, because they were more or less thinking about a 4-game suspension, but they never handed it down. That's from what I read anyway. They were thinking about that 4-game suspension. The fact that instead Harbaugh is going to be, like you say, on the sidelines during the week and then can't be in the press box except to watch. He can't be mic'd up and he can't be on the sideline. I think that's fair. That seems like a pretty fair thing. And obviously, like most big teams, they start off with 3 teams that aren't exactly world beaters. Some people aren't so lucky, like Coach Prime at Colorado, Pete. Yeah. He starts off with TCU. That's a top 10 program every year lately. So that's a much different start than East Carolina. Yeah. But when Harbaugh comes back, you know what game he comes back to start the Big Ten with, Pete? Rutgers. And if I don't mean disrespect to Rutgers, folks, but they have as much chance of beating Michigan as Pete does to be a ballerina. It's just not happening.
That doesn't seem like a good chance.
No, it doesn't seem like a good chance. And, you know, I'm sure they have some great players. We've seen some players make the NFL roster out of Rutgers, but the whole Michigan team is pretty much under consideration, at least, for playing on Sundays. Yeah. They're not as good as Georgia, and Georgia showed them that a couple times in the last couple of years, but they are very, very good. But like you say, Pete, they don't have Jalen Carter and Jordan and some of these monsters at Michigan, but they're a really good football team, and I don't think they'll have a problem with any of these first 4 games. And I do think Michigan did the right thing, Pete.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I played against Jim in college, and I'll tell you, the guy was a great quarterback back in the day. Amazing guy. He is tenacious in every way, mentally, physically, everything. And a little bit off his rocker in some ways too, which is kind of cool. And I think it's great. And, you know, this guy could end up being one more trip to the NFL. It just seems like every offseason you kind of wonder, is he going to stay at Michigan? Is he going to stay there? I think he enjoys it, John, but we might see him and his brother playing against each other, or at least coaching against each other at some point in the next year or two, I would say.
Could happen. Definitely could happen. All right. Well, folks, thank you for joining us. We appreciate SIBO Global Markets hosting on this end, and I will be back here tomorrow. I'll also be on with Charles Payne later today at 2:45 Eastern Daylight Time with the big man himself, Charles Payne, Fox Business Channel. So we'll see you tomorrow at 1 p.m., everybody. Have a great day.
Giddy up.